The Pacific Northwest coastline in late November was a study in raw, primal beauty, the kind that didn't care if you appreciated it or not. The Oregon shore stretched endlessly, a jagged meeting of ancient stone and furious water, where towering Sitka spruce forests ended abruptly at cliffs that dropped 100 feet into churning gray surf below. Navy SEAL Senior Chief Ethan Cross stood on the weathered deck of his rented cabin, a steaming mug of black coffee warming his calloused hands. At 6'1", with a frame built from years of carrying heavy loads through impossible terrain, he had the kind of presence that made people instinctively step aside. His dark hair was longer than regulation now, almost 3 weeks into his 30-day leave, and his face, all sharp angles and a jaw shadowed with stubble, carried the weight of 36 years and too many classified operations to count. The wind coming off the Pacific was cold enough to bite, carrying the sharp tang of salt and the deep mineral smell of wet stone. Ethan breathed it in slowly, deliberately, letting the clean air fill lungs that had tasted too much cordite and desert dust. This was supposed to be his reset, his decompression. The Navy psychiatrist had been clear. You need to find peace, Chief. Real peace, not the kind you enforce with a rifle. Beside him, lying in a relaxed sphinx position on the worn planks, was the only reason Ethan had survived the last decade with his sanity relatively intact. Odin was a 95-pound Belgian Malinois with a coat the color of aged mahogany and black markings that made his intelligent amber eyes seem even more penetrating. At 7 years old, Odin was a veteran military working dog, explosives detection, tactical tracking, and personnel apprehension. On deployment, he was a weapon system. Here, he was Ethan's anchor to something resembling normalcy. "What do you think, boy?" Ethan murmured, scratching behind the dog's alert ears. "Think we can make it a full month without the world falling apart?" Odin's tail gave a single thump against the deck. The dog's gaze was fixed on the tree line, always scanning, always assessing. Even in peace, warriors never truly rested. The cabin was perfect for what Ethan needed, isolated, functional, and utterly removed from civilization. The nearest town, Crescent Bay, was a 15-mile drive down a serpentine coastal road. His only neighbors were the gulls, the occasional black-tailed deer, and the distant silhouette of the Cape Sorrow Lighthouse, a decommissioned sentinel perched on a rocky promontory 2 miles up the coast. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. Ethan had come here with one mission: silence. He wanted to hear nothing but waves and wind. He wanted to sleep without his hand instinctively reaching for a sidearm. He wanted to forget, even for a few weeks, the faces of the men he'd lost, the villages he'd cleared, the missions that lived in the classified shadows of his memory. But as he stood there, watching the gray sky press down against the darker gray of the sea, a flicker of old instinct made him pause. It was nothing concrete, just a feeling, the same primal awareness that had kept him alive in Kandahar and the South China Sea. The feeling that something was wrong. He dismissed it. This was Oregon, not Afghanistan. The only enemy here was his own restlessness. He was wrong. 20 miles south, in the cramped ranger station office in Cape Sorrow State Park, Ranger Sienna Vale was staring at a map covered in red circles and handwritten notes. At 32, Sienna had the lean, weathered build of someone who spent more time hiking vertical terrain than sitting at desks. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a practical braid, and her green eyes, sharp and observant, tracked the patterns on the map with the focus of a detective. She had been a park ranger for 8 years, assigned to one of the most remote and rugged sections of the Oregon coast. It was a job that required equal parts wilderness expertise, law enforcement capability, and the kind of stubborn independence that made bureaucrats nervous. Sienna excelled at all three. Beside her desk, lying on a thick wool mat, was her constant companion and partner. Freya, a 4-year-old German shepherd with a sable and black coat and the kind of focused intensity that marked her as more than just a pet. Freya was a certified K9 Ranger, trained in search and rescue, wilderness tracking, and evidence detection. Together, they had pulled lost hikers from cliff faces, tracked poachers through impenetrable forest, and discovered more than one illegal grow operation hidden in the park's backcountry. "Look at this, girl," Sienna said, tapping the map. Freya's ears perked up, her dark eyes following Sienna's finger. The map showed a cluster of red circles along the decommissioned service roads near the old Cape Sorrow Lighthouse. Over the past 4 months, Sienna had documented something that didn't belong. Fresh tire tracks on roads that had been closed for a decade, deep ruts from heavy vehicles, disturbed brush, and, twice, the unmistakable chemical smell of industrial solvents in areas where no industrial work was authorized. "Someone's using the old lighthouse access route," she muttered, "moving something heavy, at night." She had reported it, multiple times, filed detailed incident reports with her supervisor, Ranger District Chief Marcus Holbrook. Each time, she received the same response. "We'll look into it, Vale. Probably just local kids." But Sienna knew the difference between teenagers joyriding and professional logistics. These weren't kids, these were operators. 3 days ago, she had finally gotten the breakthrough. A hiker had found a discarded fuel canister near the Lighthouse Trail, industrial grade, the kind used for generators or heavy machinery. Sienna had photographed it, documented the GPS coordinates, and sent another report to Holbrook. This time, his response had been different. "Good work, Vale. Meet me at the Lighthouse access gate tomorrow at dusk. We'll check it out together. Come alone. This stays between us until we know what we're dealing with." That message should have been a red flag, but Sienna, driven by a need to protect her park and uncover the truth, had seen only validation. Someone was finally taking her seriously. She looked at Freya, whose tail was wagging slowly. "Tomorrow night, we get answers." Marcus Holbrook was a man who wore authority like a well-tailored suit. At 48, with silver threading through his dark hair, and the kind of commanding presence that came from 20 years in federal law enforcement, he looked every bit the respectable district chief of Cape Sorrow State Parks. His office was decorated with commendations, photos of him shaking hands with politicians, and framed certificates praising his dedication to conservation. It was all a lie. Holbrook sat in his government-issued SUV in the parking lot of a seafood processing plant 20 miles inland, his phone pressed to his ear. His friendly, professional demeanor had been replaced by something cold and calculating. "She's becoming a problem," he said, his voice low. "Vale won't let this go. She's documented everything, routes, times, the fuel canister. If she connects the dots to the lighthouse, the entire operation is compromised." On the other end of the line, a voice responded, smooth, unbothered, and utterly devoid of conscience. "Then remove the problem, Marcus. That's what we pay you for." The voice belonged to a man known only as Crow. No one knew his real name. No one had ever seen his face in an official capacity. Crow was a ghost who ran one of the most sophisticated smuggling networks on the West Coast. His operation moved military-grade weapons, stolen pharmaceuticals, and, when the price was right, people. He used the vast wilderness of the Pacific Northwest as his personal highway, and corrupt officials like Holbrook as his gatekeepers. "It's not that simple," Holbrook said, his jaw tightening. "Vale is popular. She's got a reputation. If she just disappears, there will be questions. Federal questions." "Then make it look like an accident," Crow said, his tone bored. "You're the ranger, Marcus. People die in the wilderness all the time. Exposure, falls, animal attacks. Be creative." Holbrook stared out at the gray, overcast sky. He had crossed too many lines to turn back now. The money was too good. The lifestyle it afforded, the second home in Bend, the offshore accounts, the quiet, comfortable corruption, was too seductive. "I'll handle it," he said finally. "See that you do. The next shipment arrives in 48 hours. The lighthouse needs to be secure. No witnesses, no complications." The line went dead. Holbrook sat in silence for a moment, then pulled up a contact on his phone. It was a burner number. The man who answered was Garrett Kane, a former Marine turned private contractor, which was a polite way of saying enforcer. Kane had done wet work for Crow before. He was efficient, brutal, and asked no questions. "I'll need a job done," Holbrook said. "Tonight, Cape Sorrow Lighthouse. One target, possibly with a K9. Make it look like exposure or a fall. Clean." "Price?" Kane's voice was flat, mechanical. "20,000. Done. Send me the details." Holbrook sent a text with Sienna's photo, vehicle description, and the meeting location. Then he deleted the conversation and started his truck. Tomorrow night, Ranger Sienna Vale would walk into a trap, and she would never walk out. The sky over Cape Sorrow had turned the color of old bruises by the time Sienna Vale arrived at the lighthouse access gate. The sun was a dying ember on the horizon, and the temperature had dropped fast, down into the low 30s, with a bitter wind screaming in from the ocean. Sienna stepped out of her ranger truck, Freya immediately at her side. The dog's nose was up, testing the air, her body tense. Something felt wrong. The gate was open. That was the first anomaly. The lighthouse access road had been chained and locked for years. Now the heavy chain lay coiled in the dirt, the padlock sheared clean off. "Chief Holbrook," Sienna called out, her voice swallowed by the wind. No response. She pulled her radio. "Dispatch, this is Ranger Vale. I'm at the Cape Sorrow Lighthouse access. Advise if Chief Holbrook called in his location." Static crackled back. Then, "Negative, Vale. No check-in from the chief." Sienna's hand moved instinctively to her duty belt. Pepper spray, baton, and a Glock 19 she rarely had to draw. Freya was pressed against her leg now, a low rumble building in the dog's chest. "Easy, girl," Sienna whispered, but she trusted the dog's instincts. Freya didn't give false alarms. She should have turned around, should have called for backup. But Sienna was driven by the same stubborn need that had defined her career. She needed to know. She needed proof. She moved forward, Freya slightly ahead, the dog's body language shifting into full working mode. The access road wound through dense forest before opening onto the rocky promontory where the lighthouse stood, a towering cylinder of weathered stone and rust-streaked metal, its light long extinguished. As they rounded the final curve, Sienna saw two vehicles. One was Chief Holbrook's SUV. The other was a black panel van with no markings, the kind of vehicle you used when you didn't want to be remembered. The lighthouse door, a heavy steel barrier, was ajar. That was when Freya's growl turned into a sharp, warning bark, and that was when the trap closed. 3 men emerged from the tree line behind her. They moved with military precision, no wasted motion, weapons already drawn. 2 had AR-style rifles. The third, the largest, carried a suppressed pistol. The big man stepped forward. This was Garrett Kane. He was 6'3", built like a concrete pylon with a shaved head and eyes as cold and gray as the ocean behind him. "Ranger Vale," he said, his voice utterly devoid of warmth. "You've been very persistent." Sienna's hand went to her sidearm, but Kane was faster. The suppressed pistol barked once, a muted thwip, and pain exploded in Sienna's right shoulder. She spun, crashing to the gravel. Her weapon clattered out of reach. Freya didn't hesitate. The German shepherd launched herself at Kane, 85 pounds of trained fury. She hit him high, jaws snapping for his gun arm. Kane roared, staggering back, but one of the other men, a wiry figure with a hawk tattoo on his neck, fired. The shot caught Freya in the flank. The dog yelped, a sound of shock and pain, and crumpled to the ground. "No!" Sienna screamed, trying to crawl toward her partner. Blood was pouring from her shoulder, hot and slick. Kane kicked her in the ribs, hard enough to crack bone. The air exploded from Sienna's lungs. She curled into herself, gasping. "Secure them both," Kane ordered. Rough hands dragged Sienna upright. They zip-tied her wrists behind her back, the plastic cutting into her skin. One of the men, younger, nervous, grabbed Freya. The dog was still alive, whimpering, trying to crawl toward Sienna. "Leave her," Kane snapped. "She's bleeding out. Won't last the hour." They hauled Sienna into the lighthouse. The interior was a hollow shell, rusted metal stairs spiraling upward, the walls weeping with moisture and decay. But the ground floor had been repurposed. There were fresh crates stacked against the walls, industrial lighting rigged from a portable generator, and in the center, a heavy iron chair bolted to the concrete floor. They forced Sienna into the chair. More zip ties around her ankles, lashing her to the chair legs. She was immobilized. Kane crouched in front of her, his face inches from hers. "You've been documenting our routes. You filed reports. Who else knows?" "Everyone," Sienna spat, blood on her lips. "You're done." Kane smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "No, Ranger, you filed reports with your boss, Chief Holbrook. And guess what? Holbrook works for us." The words hit Sienna like a second bullet. Holbrook, her supervisor, the man she'd trusted. "You're lying," she whispered. "Am I?" Kane pulled out his phone and played a voicemail. It was Holbrook's voice. "Secure the lighthouse. Make it clean." Sienna's world shattered. Kane stood. "Last chance. Who else did you tell?" "No one," Sienna said, her voice hollow. It was the truth. She had followed protocol. She had trusted the system, and the system had betrayed her. "Good," Kane said. He looked at his men. "Bleed her out slow. Make sure the K9's dead. When they find them in a week, it'll look like they got caught in a storm. Exposure, hypothermia, tragic accident." He walked out. The younger enforcer, his name was Lyle, stayed behind. He looked uncomfortable, his gaze darting between Sienna and the open door where Freya lay in a spreading pool of blood. "I'm sorry," he muttered. Then he followed Kane out, sealing the heavy steel door behind him. The sound of a padlock clicking into place echoed through the hollow space. Sienna was alone, tied to a chair in a freezing lighthouse, her shoulder screaming with pain, her partner dying on the cold ground outside, and no one was coming. Ethan Cross couldn't sleep. It was 0200 hours, and he was wide awake, staring at the cabin ceiling, Odin's warm bulk pressed against his side. The dog had been restless all evening, pacing, whining softly, his gaze fixed on the northern window. "What is it, boy?" Ethan whispered. Odin's ears swiveled toward the door. He let out a low, insistent whine. Ethan had learned long ago not to ignore his dog's instincts. Odin had saved his life more than once by sensing danger before Ethan's human senses could register it. If the dog said something was wrong, something was wrong. Ethan pulled on his boots, grabbed a heavy jacket, and clipped a tactical flashlight to his belt. He didn't take a weapon. This was Oregon, not Ramadi. But he did slip a combat knife into his boot. Old habits. "Show me," he said. Odin bolted out the door the moment it opened, his powerful body cutting through the darkness. Ethan followed, his breath fogging in the frigid air. The moon was a thin crescent, barely illuminating the forest trail. Odin led him north, toward the coast, toward the lighthouse. They moved fast, Ethan's boots crunching on the frost-covered ground. The wind was howling now, carrying the smell of salt and something else, something wrong. Odin's pace quickened. He was tracking something, After 20 minutes of hard hiking, they emerged onto the rocky clearing around Cape Sorrow Lighthouse. The structure loomed above them, dark and imposing, and there, collapsed in the gravel near the base, was Freya. Ethan's blood went cold. The German shepherd was lying in a pool of blood, her breathing shallow and labored. Her eyes, glassy with pain, tracked his movement. "Easy, girl," Ethan murmured, dropping to his knees. He had field medical training. He quickly assessed the wound, a bullet grazed along her flank, deep and bleeding, but not immediately fatal. Odin approached slowly, whining. He licked Freya's face gently, a gesture of comfort. The injured dog's tail gave a weak thump. Ethan's gaze swept the area. There, a pool of blood near the lighthouse door, human blood, and tire tracks, fresh ones. Someone had been attacked here, recently. His tactical mind snapped into operator mode. He approached the lighthouse door. It was locked from the outside with a heavy padlock. He pressed his ear to the steel. Silence. Then, faint, so faint he almost missed it, a sound, a ragged breath, a whimper. "Someone's inside," he said. His voice was ice. He grabbed the padlock, industrial grade. He didn't have his lock picks, but he did have his knife, and years of breaching experience. It took him 3 minutes to wedge the blade into the lock mechanism and pry it apart. The padlock clattered to the ground. He pulled the door open. The smell hit him first, blood, sweat, and the sharp chemical tang of fear. The interior was lit by a single dying work light, and there, in the center of the floor, was a woman. She was slumped in an iron chair, her wrists and ankles bound with zip ties. Her ranger uniform was torn and soaked with blood. Her face was pale, lips tinged blue. She was shaking violently, deep into hypothermia. But she was alive. Her eyes fluttered open. She stared at him, confused, terrified. "Freya," she whispered, her voice a cracked rasp. "My dog. Is she?" "She's alive," Ethan said, his voice steady and calm. "I'm getting you out. Stay with me." He pulled his knife and cut through the zip ties. Her arms fell limply to her sides. He caught her before she collapsed. "I'm Ethan," he said. "Navy SEAL. You're safe now." Sienna's eyes tried to focus on him. They'll come back. Let them," Ethan said, his voice colder than the wind outside. "I'll be waiting." He lifted her. She was lighter than his standard combat load and carried her out into the night. Odin was already standing guard over Freya. The 2 dogs, one injured, one protective, looked at Ethan as he emerged with Sienna in his arms. "We're going home," Ethan said. "All of us." And in that moment, the mission found him. Ethan didn't waste time. He carried Sienna back through the forest trail with the kind of ground-eating efficiency that came from years of moving through hostile terrain with wounded teammates. She was barely conscious, her head lolling against his shoulder, her breath coming in short, pained gasps. Behind them, Odin moved with Freya. The Belgian Malinois had somehow coaxed the injured German shepherd to her feet. Freya limped badly, her flank matted with blood, but she refused to be left behind. Her eyes never left Sienna. Even wounded, her loyalty was absolute. The cabin appeared through the trees like a sanctuary. Ethan kicked the door open and moved straight to the living room. He laid Sienna on the couch, already assessing her injuries with the cold precision of a combat medic. Gunshot wound, right shoulder, through and through. Broken ribs, left side, advanced hypothermia, shock. Odin and Freya entered. Freya collapsed near the fireplace, her body trembling. Odin immediately positioned himself beside her, his warmth and presence a lifeline. Ethan worked fast. He started a fire, the dry kindling catching immediately, flames roaring to life. He stripped Sienna's wet, blood-soaked clothing, covering her with every blanket and sleeping bag he owned. He elevated her feet. He applied pressure bandages to her shoulder. He wrapped heated towels around her core, and all the while his mind was calculating, analyzing, planning. This wasn't random violence. This was professional. The zip ties, the isolated location, the execution setup. This was a hit, which meant whoever did this would come back, either to confirm the kill or to dispose of evidence. Ethan pulled his satellite phone from his gear bag. No cell service out here, but the sat phone connected to military networks. He dialed the number he'd sworn he wouldn't use during his leave. The line clicked. "Cross, you're supposed to be decompressing." The voice belonged to Lieutenant Commander Rachel Briggs, Ethan's former platoon commander and one of the few people in the world he trusted implicitly. "I found someone," Ethan said, his voice clipped. "Female park ranger. She and her K9 were shot, bound, and left to die in the old Cape Sorrow Lighthouse." This was an execution, Commander. Professional. There was a pause. "Where is she now?" "My cabin. Stabilized but critical. I need medical and federal law enforcement, Coast Guard, Medevac, and FBI. No local PD. This smells like inside corruption." "Understood. I'll make calls. Sit tight. Help is coming." Ethan hung up. He looked at Sienna, whose eyes had opened again. She was staring at him with a mix of confusion and desperation. "Holbrook," she whispered. "My boss. He's one of them." Ethan knelt beside her. "I believe you, and we're going to make him pay. But first you need to stay alive. Can you do that?" Sienna's hand, cold and trembling, gripped his. "Freya, please." "I've got her," Ethan said. He moved to the fireplace where Freya lay. He examined the wound. The bullet had passed through muscle, missing vital organs. He cleaned it, applied antibiotic ointment from his advanced med kit, and wrapped it tightly. Odin watched every move, his amber eyes intelligent and assessing. When Ethan finished, Odin lay down beside Freya, his body providing warmth. Freya's head rested on his paws. The two dogs, strangers hours ago, were now pack. Ethan returned to Sienna. "Your partner's strong. She's going to make it." Tears tracked down Sienna's face. "They bolted the chair to the floor. They were going to let us freeze. They were going to make it look like an accident." "I know," Ethan said, his voice hard, "and they're going to answer for it." He moved to the window, scanning the dark forest. His seal instincts were screaming. They weren't safe yet, not by a long shot. And he was right. At 0437 hours, Odin's head snapped up, his ears locked forward. A low, warning growl rumbled in his chest. Ethan was at the window instantly. In the pre-dawn gray, he saw them, two figures moving through the trees. They were armed, tactical gear, moving with purpose. Kane had sent a cleanup crew. Ethan's jaw tightened. These men had come to his home. They had come to finish what they started. Big mistake. He grabbed the Remington 870 shotgun he kept for wildlife deterrent and checked the load. He looked at Sienna, then at the two dogs. "Stay quiet. Stay low. This'll be over fast." He stepped out onto the porch, the shotgun held in a low ready position. The cold bit at his face, but he didn't feel it. He was back in operator mode, calm, focused, lethal. The two men emerged from the tree line. They saw him. One raised his rifle. "Wrong move," Ethan said quietly. The world exploded into violence. The lead enforcer, a blocky man in his 30s with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow, raised his AR-15. He had a fraction of a second to register that the man on the porch wasn't some scared civilian. Ethan moved first. He didn't fire, not yet. Instead, he dropped into a crouch and rolled left off the porch, using the cabin's foundation as cover. The enforcer's shot went high, splintering wood where Ethan's head had been a heartbeat before. Amateur. Ethan came up behind a thick Douglas fir, his shotgun tracking. The second enforcer, younger, faster, was trying to flank right. Classic two-man assault pattern. They'd done this before, but they'd never done it against a Navy SEAL. "Odin," Ethan said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Take the right." The Belgian Malinois exploded through the cabin's side window, glass shattering in a cascade of glittering shards. He hit the ground running, a sable blur moving with preternatural speed. The younger enforcer spun, raising his weapon. "What the—" Odin hit him like a guided missile. 95 pounds of muscle and trained aggression slammed into the man's center mass. The enforcer went down hard, his rifle flying. Odin's jaws clamped onto the man's gun arm, not killing but controlling. The enforcer screamed. The lead enforcer turned toward the sound. Fatal mistake. Ethan stepped out from behind the tree. "Drop it." His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It carried the flat, absolute authority of a man who had given that command in a dozen war zones and knew it would be obeyed. The enforcer didn't drop it. He swung his rifle toward Ethan. Ethan fired. The Remington's boom was deafening and the forest quiet. The buckshot caught the enforcer in the shoulder, spinning him like a rag doll. The rifle clattered to the frozen ground. The man collapsed, clutching his shredded shoulder, blood pumping between his fingers. Ethan was on him in 3 strides. He kicked the rifle away, then delivered a precise strike to the man's temple with the shotgun's stock. The enforcer went limp. "Odin, release." The Malinois immediately let go of the younger enforcer's arm and sat, his eyes locked on the groaning man. The enforcer's forearm was a mess of puncture wounds, but he'd live. Ethan zip-tied both men's wrists behind their backs with practiced efficiency. Then he dragged them both into the clearing in front of the cabin, dumping them side by side. The younger one, his name tag read Lyle, was crying. "Jesus, man, we were just supposed to check." "Shut up," Ethan said. His voice was ice. He pulled the enforcer's radio from his tactical vest and keyed it. "Anyone listening to this channel, hear me clearly. Your team is down. If you send more, they'll end up the same way. Or worse." He tossed the radio onto Lyle's chest. Ethan looked at the 2 men. They weren't SEALs. They weren't even good. They were thugs with tactical gear, dangerous to civilians, irrelevant to him. "Who sent you?" Ethan asked. Lyle's face was pale. "Kane. Garrett Kane. He's working for someone. I don't know who. We were just supposed to make sure the ranger and the dog were dead. That's all. Where's Kane now?" "I don't know. He operates out of the old processing plant, 20 miles south. But that's all I know, I swear." Ethan nodded slowly. He heard it. The distant thrum of helicopter rotors. Rachel had come through. The cavalry was arriving. 2 Coast Guard MH-65 Dolphins appeared over the tree line, their searchlights blazing. They sat down in the clearing, rotors whipping the frozen ground into a frenzy. Paramedics poured out, along with 4 armed federal agents in tactical gear. One of the agents, a tall woman with steel-gray hair pulled into a severe bun, approached Ethan. Her ID read, SSA Morgan Chen, FBI. "You must be Cross," she said, her voice clipped and professional. "Commander Briggs gave us a sit-rep. Where's the victim?" Ethan gestured to the cabin. Inside, GSW to the shoulder, hypothermia, possible internal bleeding. Her K9 partner is also wounded. They need immediate medevac. Chen barked orders. The paramedics moved into the cabin. Moments later, they emerged with Sienna on a stretcher, IV lines already running. Freya was carried on a second stretcher, Odin walking beside her, refusing to leave. Sienna's eyes found Ethan's as they loaded her into the helo. "Thank you," she mouthed. Ethan nodded once. Chen looked at the 2 zip-tied enforcers bleeding in the dirt. "And these?" "Cleanup crew. Came to finish the job. They're cooperating." Chen's expression was hard. "Good. We'll take them into custody. You're coming with us, Chief Cross. We need your statement." "Not yet," Ethan said. There's someone else involved. Ranger District Chief Marcus Holbrook. He's dirty. He set her up." Chen's eyes narrowed. "You have proof?" "The victim's testimony, plus these two." He nudged Lyle with his boot. "They'll talk. Then we move fast," Chen said, "before Holbrook knows we're coming." Ethan looked at Odin. The dog was still staring at the helicopter carrying Freya. His posture was tense, protective. "We're going to finish this, boy," Ethan said quietly. "For her." Odin's gaze shifted to Ethan, and in those amber eyes there was understanding. The mission wasn't over, not even close. The FBI tactical team moved with the kind of quiet, overwhelming force that left no room for resistance. By 0800 hours, they had Marcus Holbrook in custody. They didn't take him at his office. They took him at home, a sprawling craftsman-style house overlooking the ocean, the kind of home a district ranger chief shouldn't be able to afford on a government salary. Holbrook was in his bathrobe, coffee in hand, when the door crashed open. He had exactly 3 seconds to process what was happening before 4 agents had him face down on his imported Italian tile, his hands cuffed behind his back. "Marcus Holbrook, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder of a federal officer, corruption, and racketeering," SSA Chen said, her voice flat. "You have the right to remain silent." Holbrook's face had gone from confused to terrified to calculatingly blank in the span of a breath. "I want my lawyer." "You'll get one," Chen said, "after we're done." They hauled him into a windowless interview room at the FBI field office in Portland. Holbrook sat in silence, his expensive bathrobe replaced by an orange jumpsuit, his wrists still cuffed. Ethan Cross stood behind the two-way mirror, watching. Beside him was Odin, still on high alert. Chen entered the room with a thick file. She dropped it on the table in front of Holbrook. "Your cleanup crew talked," she said. "Lyle and Marcus, they gave you up in under an hour. Garrett Kane is in the wind, but we'll find him. And when we do, he'll give up his boss. This whole operation is unraveling, Marcus." Holbrook said nothing. Chen opened the file. "Ranger Sienna Vale. She trusted you. She reported suspicious activity for months, and you buried every report. Why? Because you were running interference for a smuggling operation." She slid a photo across the table. It showed tire tracks, crates, and the interior of the Cape Sorrow Lighthouse. "We found the rest of it this morning. 50 crates of stolen military weapons, pharmaceuticals, falsified shipping manifests, all moving through state park land, your land, Marcus." Holbrook's jaw tightened. "And when Vale got too close, you set her up. You sent her to the lighthouse knowing Kane would be waiting. You tried to have her killed." "I want my lawyer," Holbrook repeated, his voice mechanical. Chen leaned forward. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to prison for the rest of your life. But you can choose how you get there. Cooperate, give us Crow, and maybe you avoid a supermax. Or stay silent, and we bury you so deep you'll never see daylight again." For the first time, Holbrook's mask cracked. "You don't understand. Crow isn't just some smuggler. He's connected. Lawyers, judges, people you can't touch." "Try me," Chen said coldly. Holbrook stared at the table. Then, slowly, he started talking. Behind the mirror, Ethan watched. This was justice, not the kind delivered with a rifle in the dark, the kind delivered in a courtroom with evidence and testimony and the full weight of the law. But it was justice nonetheless. 2 days later, Ethan walked into the private room at Oregon Health and Science University Hospital. Sienna was sitting up in bed, her shoulder heavily bandaged, an IV line running to her arm. She looked pale and exhausted, but alive. And beside her bed, lying on a thick dog bed provided by the hospital staff, was Freya. The German shepherd's flank was wrapped in clean white bandages, but her eyes were bright and alert. Her tail thumped once when she saw Ethan. Odin was at Ethan's side. The moment he entered, Freya's tail went into overdrive. Odin approached slowly, respectfully, and touched his nose to hers, a moment of quiet communication between warriors. "Hey," Sienna said, her voice still hoarse. "They told me what you did. The FBI, the arrests. You saved my life." Ethan shook his head. "Odin found you. I just followed." "Still," Sienna said. Tears welled in her eyes. "They were going to let us die. And you didn't even know me." "Didn't matter," Ethan said simply. "You needed help." Sienna looked at Freya, who had rested her head on Odin's paws. "She's going to be okay. The vet said another inch and the bullet would have hit her spine. But she's tough. Like her partner," Ethan said. Sienna smiled faintly, then her expression darkened. "Holbrook, I trusted him. I reported everything to him, and he's going to prison," Ethan said, "for a long time, and so is everyone else involved. You did your job, Sienna. You documented everything. Without your reports, we wouldn't have had a case. But I almost died doing it." "Yeah," Ethan said, "but you didn't. And now the operation's shut down. The lighthouse is secure. The smuggling route is burned. You won." Sienna closed her eyes. "Doesn't feel like winning." Ethan understood that. He'd felt it himself more times than he could count. Victory that tasted like ash. A knock at the door interrupted them. SSA Chen entered, followed by a younger agent carrying a box. "Ranger Vale," Chen said. "I wanted to update you personally. We've made 17 arrests in the last 48 hours. The smuggling network is dismantled. Holbrook is cooperating. We're closing in on Crow." "Good," Sienna said quietly. Chen hesitated. "There's something else. The Park Service wants you back. Full reinstatement. They're calling you a hero." Sienna's face hardened. "A hero. They ignored my reports for months. Holbrook was my supervisor, and no one noticed he was dirty. The system failed." "I know," Chen said, "and that's why I'm here with an offer. The FBI is starting a task force, Wilderness Crimes Unit. Smuggling, trafficking, illegal activity on federal land. We need people who know the terrain, people we can trust." She set a business card on the table. "Think about it." Chen left. Sienna stared at the card. Ethan sat down. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know," Sienna admitted. "I love this job, but now you know the truth," Ethan said. "The uniform doesn't make you clean. The badge doesn't make you trustworthy. What makes you those things is what you do when no one's watching." Sienna looked at him. "Is that what you tell yourself?" "Every day," Ethan said. They sat in silence, two people who had walked through darkness and survived. Outside the window, the Oregon rain was falling, soft and cleansing, and, for the first time in days, Sienna felt something other than fear. She felt hope. If this story has you on the edge of your seat, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss stories like this. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more incredible true stories of courage and loyalty. 3 weeks after the arrests, Ethan Cross sat in a secure briefing room at the FBI's Portland field office. With him were SSA Morgan Chen, Sienna Vale, now officially a consultant with the Wilderness Crimes Task Force, and a man Ethan had never met. Senior Special Agent David Corso, Financial Crimes Division. Corso was thin, balding, and had the weary eyes of someone who spent too much time staring at spreadsheets. But when he spoke, there was steel in his voice. "We have a problem," Corso said, pulling up a digital presentation. "Garrett Kane is still in the wind. We've frozen his accounts, issued warrants, but he's a ghost. However, we did find something else." He clicked a button. A network diagram appeared, dozens of nodes all connected. "This is Crow's operation. It's bigger than we thought. The lighthouse was just one node. There are 4 other locations across the Pacific Northwest, each one run by a corrupt official. Park rangers, sheriff deputies, port authority. Sienna's face went pale. How many? At least 12 that we've identified, but here's the interesting part. Corso zoomed in on one node. Every single one of these officials received consulting fees from the same shell corporation, North Point Logistics. And North Point is? Ethan asked. Owned by a private equity firm based in Seattle, Cascade Holdings, and guess who sits on the board of Cascade? He clicked again. A photo appeared. A man in his 50s, silver hair, perfect teeth, wearing a $1,000 suit. He looked like every other tech executive in Seattle. Douglas Mercer, Corso said, former CEO of a defense contractor, current venture capitalist, philanthropist. He donated $2 million to wilderness conservation last year. He's Crow, Chen said, her voice flat. We believe so, Corso confirmed, but we can't prove it. He's insulated behind layers of shell companies and legitimate businesses. Holbrook never met him. Kane communicated through encrypted channels. We need something concrete. Ethan leaned forward. Where is he now? His estate, San Juan Island, private compound, security, legal team on retainer. He knows we're coming. He's preparing. Then we need to move fast, Sienna said. Chen shook her head. We can't, not without evidence. If we raid his compound and come up empty, his lawyers will bury us. We need a warrant, which means we need probable cause. Ethan looked at Odin, who was lying at his feet. Then he looked at Freya, who was resting beside Sienna. The 2 dogs had become inseparable over the past weeks. What if we already have it? Ethan said slowly. Everyone turned to him. Sienna documented everything. Routes, times. She has photos of the crates at the Lighthouse. We have Holbrook's testimony. We have the financial trail. What we don't have is the link between Mercer and the physical evidence. Correct, Corso said. That's the gap. Ethan smiled grimly. Then let's close it. The plan was audacious, dangerous, and probably illegal. But Ethan didn't care. Neither did Sienna. They were operating in the gray zone now, the space between lawful investigation and direct action. The FBI couldn't officially sanction what they were about to do. But Chen, after a long silence, had said 3 words. I trust you. That was enough. Ethan and Sienna, along with Odin and Freya, flew to Seattle. They rented an unmarked vehicle and drove north to Anacortes, then took the ferry to San Juan Island. The Pacific Northwest in December was cold, wet, and beautiful. The ferry cut through dark water, seabirds wheeling overhead. You sure about this? Sienna asked, standing at the railing. No, Ethan said honestly, but it's the right move. They had one objective: reconnaissance, locate evidence, document it, build the case. They weren't going to raid Mercer's compound. They were going to find what he'd hidden. Because men like Mercer, men who built empires on corruption, always kept insurance, backup files, physical evidence, something to leverage or destroy if the walls closed in, and Ethan was betting that insurance was hidden somewhere on Mercer's property. They landed on the island at dusk. Mercer's estate was on the northern shore, a sprawling compound behind high walls with security cameras and armed guards. But the property backed onto dense forest, federal land, public access. Sienna had pulled the original survey maps. There was an old logging road that ran within half a mile of Mercer's back fence. It was overgrown, forgotten. Perfect. They parked the vehicle and hiked in. Odin and Freya moved ahead, silent scouts in the fading light. Both dogs were in full working mode now, noses up, ears forward, bodies low and controlled. This is insane, Sienna whispered as they crouched in the underbrush, watching the compound through binoculars. Yep, Ethan agreed. They watched for 2 hours. The guards followed a predictable pattern. Patrol every 30 minutes, overlapping coverage at the front gate, but a blind spot near the back where the forest encroached on the fence line. "There," Ethan said, pointing. "That outbuilding, 20 yards inside the fence. It's separate from the main house, no windows, heavy lock. That's not a tool shed, that's a vault." "How do we get in?" Ethan looked at the dogs. "We don't, they do." He pulled a small harness from his pack, a K9 camera rig. He'd borrowed it from a SEAL K9 handler friend. The camera mounted to Odin's back, transmitting live video to a tablet. Odin can slip under the fence where it's uneven. He's been trained for recon. He'll scope the building. Freya stays here as backup. "Ethan, if they catch him, they won't," Ethan said with absolute confidence. "Trust him." He fitted the harness onto Odin, checked the camera feed, and gave the command. "Odin, scout, quiet." The Belgian Malinois melted into the shadows. On the tablet, Ethan watched the live feed. Odin moving low through the grass, slipping under a gap in the fence, padding silently across the compound. He reached the outbuilding. The camera showed a heavy steel door, a biometric lock, and, critically, a ventilation grate near the base. "Good boy," Ethan whispered. "Mark and return." Odin scratched the ground 3 times, leaving a scent marker, and then vanished back into the darkness. 2 minutes later, he was beside Ethan, panting softly. Ethan pulled up the footage and reviewed it. "That's our target. That building has something Mercer doesn't want anyone to see." "So what now?" Sienna asked. "Now we call Chen. We give her the footage. We show her the biometric lock, the separate structure, the security. That's enough for a warrant." "Will it be?" Sienna's voice was doubtful. Ethan met her gaze. "It has to be. Because if it wasn't, they'd just committed trespassing, unlawful surveillance, and a dozen other crimes." But Ethan had long ago accepted that justice sometimes required breaking rules written by people who had never walked through the darkness. They hiked back to the vehicle and drove to the ferry terminal. Ethan called Chen on the sat phone. "We found it," he said. "Separate structure, high security. Mercer's keeping something there, something he doesn't want found." Chen was silent for a moment. "Send me everything. I'll take it to the judge. If this works, we move tomorrow. And if it doesn't, then you'd better hope you can run fast, Cross." The line went dead. Ethan looked at Sienna. "We're committed now." "Good," she said, her green eyes hard, "because I'm done running." The FBI raid on Douglas Mercer's compound happened at 600 hours. 4 helicopters, 30 agents, federal warrants, the kind of overwhelming force that left no room for negotiation. Ethan and Sienna weren't part of the tactical team. They watched from the tree line, Odin and Freya at their sides, but Chen had arranged for them to be there, witnesses, and if things went sideways, assets. The breach was textbook. The main gate was rammed. Agents poured in. Mercer's security team, 3 armed men, took one look at the federal presence and dropped their weapons. Smart. Douglas Mercer himself was found in his study, calmly sipping coffee, dressed in a silk robe. He looked utterly unconcerned. "Gentlemen," he said as agents stormed in, "I assume you have a warrant?" Chen stepped forward. "We do. Douglas Mercer, you're under arrest for racketeering, conspiracy, smuggling, and attempted murder." Mercer smiled. "I'll have my attorneys here within the hour. You won't find anything." "We'll see," Chen said. The FBI's forensic team moved to the outbuilding Ethan had identified. They cut through, the biometric lock with a plasma torch. The door swung open. Inside was a treasure trove, file cabinets filled with shipping manifests, hard drives, burner phones, and, most damning, a detailed ledger listing every corrupt official on Mercer's payroll, including dates, amounts, and specific services rendered. Chen's voice crackled over the radio. "Cross, Sienna, get in here." They moved into the compound. Agents were already cataloging evidence. Mercer stood in the center of his opulent living room, hands cuffed, his smug expression finally cracking. "You," he said, staring at Ethan. "You're the one who found the Ranger." "Yeah," Ethan said. His voice was flat, emotionless. "You couldn't just let it go," Mercer hissed. "She was nobody, a Ranger. She didn't matter." Sienna stepped forward. "I mattered to the people I protected. I mattered to the park, and I mattered to him." She gestured to Ethan. Mercer sneered. "You're a fool. You think this ends anything? I have lawyers, I have connections. I'll be out in 6 months. Chen smiled coldly. "No, Mr. Mercer, you won't, because we have everything. Your files, your ledger, your entire network. And we have testimony from Marcus Holbrook, Garrett Kane, who we picked up in Vancouver last night, and a dozen others." For the first time, fear flickered in Mercer's eyes. "You're done," Chen said, "and you're going to spend the rest of your life in a federal prison. Enjoy the view while you can." As agents led Mercer away, Ethan and Sienna stood in the compound, watching the dawn break over the Pacific. The operation was over. The network was dismantled. Justice, finally, had been served. Odin and Freya sat side by side, their bodies pressed together. 2 warriors, 2 survivors, and 2 dogs who had saved more than just lives. They had saved hope. 6 months later, the courtroom in downtown Seattle was packed. The trial of Douglas Mercer had captivated the Pacific Northwest. Federal prosecutors had laid out a damning case. Financial records, testimony, physical evidence. The defense had tried everything, but the evidence was insurmountable. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Mercer's face went ashen. The judge, a steely-eyed woman in her 60s, showed no mercy. "Mr. Mercer, you exploited your wealth and position to corrupt public officials, endanger lives, and traffic in illegal goods. You attempted to have a federal officer murdered. You have shown no remorse. I sentence you to 35 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole." The gavel came down. In the gallery, Sienna Vale sat beside Ethan Cross. She didn't cheer. She didn't cry. She simply closed her eyes and exhaled. "It's over," she whispered. "Yeah," Ethan said. "It is." Marcus Holbrook had already been sentenced, 20 years. Garrett Kane, 25 years. The 12 other corrupt officials scattered across the network, sentences ranging from 10 to 30 years. The wilderness was safer. The system, though, scarred, had held. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Sienna and Ethan slipped out a side entrance, Odin and Freya leading the way. They had no interest in being heroes. They'd done what needed to be done. That was enough. 3 weeks later, Ethan stood on the deck of his cabin, watching the Pacific crash against the rocks below. It was late spring now. The air was warmer. The forest was alive with birdsong. Odin lay at his feet, content, but his gaze kept drifting to the driveway. At 1400 hours, a vehicle pulled up, a beat-up Park Service truck. The door opened, and Sienna climbed out, Freya immediately at her side. The German shepherd's limp was barely noticeable now. Her coat was glossy and healthy. She bounded toward Odin, and the 2 dogs greeted each other with the kind of joy that transcended species. Sienna walked onto the deck. Hey, Ethan replied. "I got the job," Sienna said. "FBI Wilderness Crimes Unit, full agent status. Training starts next month." "That's great," Ethan said, and he meant it. "What about you?" Sienna asked. "Going back to the teams?" Ethan shook his head. "No, I put in my retirement papers 20 years was enough." "So what now?" Ethan smiled faintly. "Honestly, I have no idea. For the first time in my adult life, I don't have orders. I don't have a mission." Sienna leaned against the railing. "That sounds terrifying." "It is," Ethan admitted, "but also freeing." They stood in comfortable silence, two warriors finding peace in the aftermath of war. Freya barked, a happy, playful sound. Odin chased her across the clearing, both dogs running with abandon. "They saved us," Sienna said softly. "Not the other way around." "Yeah," Ethan agreed. "They did." Sienna looked at him. "I know this is forward, but I was thinking. The FBI unit needs consultants, people with tactical experience, people who understand the wilderness." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "You offering me a job?" "I'm offering you a purpose," Sienna said. "No orders, no chain of command, just helping people who fall through the cracks, like I did." Ethan considered it. A new mission, a different kind of service. "Odin and I are in," he said finally. Sienna smiled, the first genuine, unguarded smile he'd seen from her. "Good, because I wasn't taking no for an answer." They shook hands, a partnership forged in darkness, now stepping into the light. Narrator voice. "What you've just heard is more than a story. It's a reminder that heroes walk among us. Not in capes or uniforms, though some wear those too, but in the choices they make when no one is watching." Ethan Cross didn't have to stop that night. He was on leave. He'd earned his peace, but when Odin alerted, when a life hung in the balance, he didn't hesitate. Because that's what warriors do. They answer the call. Sienna Vale didn't have to keep digging. She could have ignored the tire tracks, the strange smells, the patterns that didn't add up, but she couldn't walk away from injustice. Because that's what protectors do. They stand in the gap. And Odin and Freya, they didn't save their partners because they were trained to. They saved them because loyalty isn't a command. It's a bond, a promise that transcends words. This story isn't just about one seal and one ranger. It's about all of us. It's about the moments when we see someone suffering and have to choose. Do we look away, or do we step forward? Every day, people fall through the cracks. They're betrayed by systems that should protect them. They're left in the cold, in the dark, bound and forgotten. And every day, somewhere, someone makes the choice to be the person who answers. Maybe it's a neighbor who checks on the elderly woman next door. Maybe it's a teacher who stays late to help a struggling student. Maybe it's you, right now, deciding to share this story with someone who needs to know they're not alone. Because here's the truth. You don't need to be a Navy SEAL to be a hero. You just need to be willing to see the suffering around you and refuse to look away. To all the real-life warriors, the first responders, the park rangers, the soldiers, the K9 handlers, the everyday people who choose courage over comfort, we see you, we honor you, and we thank you. And to the dogs, the Odins and Freyas of the world, who serve without question, who love without condition, who protect without hesitation, you are heroes in the truest sense. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that good still exists in the world, don't keep it to yourself. Share it. Let it be a light in someone's darkness. Because sometimes all it takes is one person refusing to walk away, one dog refusing to stay silent, one choice to stand up instead of stand by. That's not just heroism, that's humanity at its best. God bless you, God bless the protectors, and may we all have the courage to be the answer when someone needs help. The November wind off the Pacific Ocean cut like a blade through the Oregon forest, carrying the bitter taste of salt and the promise of winter. Navy SEAL Senior. Chief Ethan Cross stood on the deck of his rented cabin, coffee steaming in his hands, and wondered if 30 days would be enough to silence the ghosts in his head. At 6'1", with a frame hardened by years of warfare, Ethan looked like what he was, a weapon temporarily set aside. His dark hair had grown past regulation length during these 3 weeks of leave, and his face carried the weight of 36 years and countless classified missions. The Navy psychiatrist had been direct. "Find peace, Chief. Real peace." Beside him lay Odin, a 95-pound Belgian Malinois with a mahogany coat and amber eyes that never stopped scanning. The military working dog was 7 years old, a veteran of explosives detection and tactical operations. On deployment, Odin was a precision instrument of war. Here, he was Ethan's only anchor to sanity. The cabin was perfect for what Ethan needed, isolated, miles from the nearest town of Crescent Bay, surrounded by nothing but ancient Sitka spruce forests and the roar of the sea. His only neighbor was the decommissioned Cape Sorrow Lighthouse, a lonely sentinel on a rocky point 2 miles up the coast. "Think we can make it a month without trouble?" Ethan murmured to Odin. The dog's tail thumped once against the weathered planks, but his gaze remained fixed on the tree line, always alert. Warriors never truly rested. As Ethan stood watching the gray sky press against the darker gray ocean, a familiar instinct prickled at the back of his neck. The same primal awareness that had kept him alive in Kandahar and the South China Sea. Something felt wrong. He dismissed it. This was Oregon, not a war zone. The only enemy here was his own restlessness. He was wrong. 20 miles south, Ranger Sienna Vale stared at a map covered in red circles and handwritten notes. At 32, she had the lean, weathered build of someone who spent more time on vertical terrain than behind desks. Her auburn hair was pulled into a practical braid, and her sharp green eyes tracked patterns on the map with detective-like focus. She had been a park ranger for 8 years, assigned to one of the most remote sections of the Oregon coast. It was work that required wilderness expertise, law enforcement capability, and stubborn independence. Sienna excelled at all three. Beside her desk lay Freya, a 4-year-old German shepherd with a sable and black coat, her certified K9 partner trained in search and rescue, wilderness tracking, and evidence detection. Together, they had pulled lost hikers from cliff faces and tracked poachers through impenetrable forest. "Look at this, girl," Sienna said, tapping the map. The red circles clustered around the old Cape Sorrow lighthouse. Over 4 months, she had documented something wrong. Fresh tire tracks on roads closed for a decade, deep ruts from heavy vehicles, disturbed brush, and, twice, the chemical smell of industrial solvents where no industrial work was authorized. "Someone's using the lighthouse access route," she muttered, "moving something heavy, at night." She had reported it multiple times to her supervisor, District Chief Marcus Holbrook. Each time, "We'll look into it, Vale. Probably just local kids." But Sienna knew the difference between teenagers and professional operators. 3 days ago, a hiker found a discarded industrial-grade fuel canister near the Lighthouse Trail. Sienna photographed it, documented coordinates, and sent another report. This time, Holbrook's response was different. "Good work, Vale. Meet me at the Lighthouse access gate tomorrow at dusk. We'll check it out together. Come alone." That message should have been a red flag. But Sienna, driven to protect her park and uncover the truth, saw only validation. "Tomorrow night, we get answers," she told Freya. Marcus Holbrook sat in his government SUV, phone pressed to his ear, his friendly demeanor replaced by something cold. "She's becoming a problem," he said quietly. "Vale won't let this go. If she connects the dots to the lighthouse, the entire operation is compromised." The voice on the other end was smooth and empty of conscience. It belonged to a man known only as Crow, a ghost who ran one of the most sophisticated smuggling networks on the West Coast, moving weapons, pharmaceuticals, and sometimes people through the Pacific Northwest wilderness. "Then remove the problem, Marcus. That's what we pay you for." It's not simple, Holbrook said. If she just disappears, there will be federal questions. Then make it look like an accident, Crow said, bored. People die in the wilderness all the time. Exposure, falls, be creative. Holbrook had crossed too many lines to turn back now. The money was too good. The second home, the offshore accounts, the comfortable corruption. I'll handle it, he said finally. He made another call to a burner number. Garrett Kane answered, former Marine, current enforcer for Crow's operation. I need a job done, Holbrook said. Tonight, Cape Sorrow Lighthouse. One target with a K9. Make it look like exposure or a fall. Price? $20,000. Done? Tomorrow night, Ranger Sienna Vale would walk into a trap. The sky had turned the color of bruises when Sienna arrived at the lighthouse access gate. Temperature had dropped into the low 30s, wind screaming in from the ocean. She stepped from her ranger truck, Freya immediately at her side, body tense. The gate was open. The heavy chain lay in the dirt, padlock sheared off. Chief Holbrook, Sienna called. No response. She radioed dispatch. This is Ranger Vale at Cape Sorrow Lighthouse access. Advise if Chief Holbrook called in his location. Negative, Vale. No check-in from the chief. Freya pressed against her leg, a low rumble building in her chest. Sienna should have turned back, should have called for backup, but she needed proof. The access road wound through dense forest before opening to the rocky promontory where the lighthouse stood. As they rounded the final curve, Sienna saw two vehicles, Holbrook's SUV and a black unmarked panel van. The lighthouse door stood ajar. Freya's growl turned into a sharp warning bark. 3 men emerged from the tree line behind her. They moved with military precision, weapons drawn. The largest stepped forward, Garrett Kane, 6'3", built like concrete with cold gray eyes. Ranger Vale, he said, voice empty of warmth. You've been very persistent. Sienna's hand went for her sidearm. Kane was faster. His suppressed pistol barked once. Pain exploded in her shoulder. She spun, crashing to gravel, weapon clattering away. Freya launched herself at Kane, 85 pounds of trained fury. She hit him high, jaws snapping for his gun arm. Kane staggered back, but another man fired. The shot caught Freya in the flank. The dog yelped and crumpled. No! Sienna screamed, trying to crawl toward her partner. Kane kicked her ribs hard enough to crack bone. Air exploded from her lungs. Secure them both, Kane ordered. They zip-tied Sienna's wrists behind her back and dragged her into the lighthouse. The interior was a hollow shell with rusted stairs, but the ground floor had been repurposed. Fresh crates against walls, industrial lighting, and a heavy iron chair bolted to concrete. They forced Sienna into the chair, zip-tying her ankles. Kane crouched before her. You've been documenting our routes. Who else knows? Everyone, Sienna spat, blood on her lips. Kane smiled without warmth. No, Ranger. You filed reports with your boss, Chief Holbrook, and Holbrook works for us. He played a voicemail on his phone, Holbrook's voice. Secure the lighthouse. Make it clean. Sienna's world shattered. Last chance. Who else did you tell? No one, Sienna whispered. It was true. She had followed protocol, trusted the system. The system had betrayed her. Good, Kane said. Bleed her out slow. Make sure the K9's dead. When they find them in a week, it'll look like they got caught in a storm. He walked out, sealing the heavy steel door. The padlock clicked into place. Sienna was alone, tied to a chair in a freezing lighthouse, her shoulder screaming, her partner dying outside. No one was coming. At 2 a.m, Ethan Cross couldn't sleep. Odin had been restless all evening, pacing and whining, his gaze fixed on the northern window. What is it, boy? Odin's ears swiveled toward the door. He let out a low, insistent whine. Ethan had learned never to ignore his dog's instincts. Odin had saved his life by sensing danger before human senses could register it. He pulled on boots, grabbed a jacket, and clipped a tactical flashlight to his belt. He slipped a combat knife into his boot. Old habits. "Show me." Odin bolted out the door into darkness. Ethan followed, breath fogging in frigid air. They moved fast through the forest trail, heading north, toward the coast, toward the lighthouse. After 20 minutes of hard hiking, they emerged onto the rocky clearing. And there, collapsed in gravel near the base, was Freya. Ethan's blood went cold. The German shepherd lay in a pool of blood, breathing shallow and labored, eyes glassy with pain. "Easy, girl," Ethan murmured, dropping to his knees. He assessed quickly. Bullet graze along her flank, deep and bleeding, but not immediately fatal. Odin approached slowly, whining, and licked Freya's face gently. Her tail gave a weak thump. Ethan's gaze swept the area. Blood near the lighthouse door. Fresh tire tracks. Someone had been attacked here. Recently. He approached the lighthouse door, pressed his ear to the steel. Silence, then, faint, a ragged breath. Someone's inside. He grabbed the padlock. Industrial grade. But he had his knife and years of breaching experience. 3 minutes to pry the mechanism apart. The padlock clattered down. He pulled the door open. The smell hit. First, blood, sweat, fear. The interior was lit by a dying work light. And there, in an iron chair, was a woman. She was slumped, wrists and ankles bound with zip ties. Her ranger uniform was torn and blood-soaked. Her face was pale, lips tinged blue, shaking violently, deep hypothermia, but alive. Her eyes fluttered open, confused and terrified. "Freya," she whispered, voice cracked. "My dog. Is she?" "She's alive," Ethan said, voice steady. "I'm getting you out. Stay with me." He cut through the zip ties. Her arms fell limply. He caught her before she collapsed. "I'm Ethan, Navy SEAL. You're safe now." They'll come back," Sienna managed. "Let them," Ethan said, voice colder than the wind. "I'll be waiting." He lifted her and carried her into the night. Odin stood guard over Freya. The 2 dogs looked at Ethan as he emerged with Sienna. "We're going home," he said. "All of us." The mission had found him. Ethan moved through the forest with ground-eating efficiency, carrying Sienna while Odin coaxed the injured Freya to her feet. The German shepherd limped badly but refused to be left behind. At the cabin, Ethan worked with combat medic precision, gunshot wound assessment, pressure bandages, heated blankets. He started a fire, stabilized Sienna, then treated Freya's wound. Odin lay beside Freya, providing warmth. The 2 dogs, strangers hours ago, were now pack. Ethan pulled his satellite phone and dialed Lieutenant Commander Rachel Briggs. "Cross, you're supposed to be decompressing." "I found someone," Ethan said, voice clipped. "Female park ranger. Shot, bound, left to die with her K9 at Cape Sorrow Lighthouse. Professional execution. I need medical and federal law enforcement, Coast Guard medevac and FBI. No local PD. This smells like inside corruption." "Understood. Help is coming." When Ethan hung up, Sienna's eyes opened. "Holbrook," she whispered. "My boss. He's one of them." "I believe you," Ethan said. "We're going to make him pay." At 0437, Odin's head snapped up, growling. Ethan saw them through the window, 2 armed figures moving through trees. Kane had sent a cleanup crew. Ethan grabbed his Remington 870 shotgun. "Stay quiet. This'll be over fast." He stepped onto the porch into the cold darkness. The 2 enforcers emerged from tree line, rifles raised. "Wrong move," Ethan said quietly. Violence erupted. The lead enforcer fired. Ethan dropped and rolled, using the cabin foundation as cover. The shot went high. "Odin, take the right." The Belgian Malinois exploded through the window, hitting the ground running. He struck the younger enforcer like a missile, 95 pounds slamming into center mass. The man went down, rifle flying. Odin's jaws clamped onto his gun arm. The lead enforcer turned toward the sound. Fatal mistake. Ethan stepped from behind the tree. "Drop it." His voice carried absolute authority. The enforcer swung his rifle toward Ethan. The Remington boomed. Buckshot caught the enforcer's shoulder, spinning him. The rifle clattered away. Ethan was on him in 3 strides, delivering a precise strike with the stock. The man went limp. "Odin, release." The Malinois sat immediately, eyes locked on the groaning enforcer. Ethan zip-tied both men and dragged them into the clearing. The younger one, Lyle, was crying. "We were just supposed to check." "Shut up," Ethan said. He keyed the enforcer's radio. "Anyone listening, your team is down. Send more. They'll end up the same. Or worse." He heard it then. Helicopter rotors. 2 Coast Guard MH-65 Dolphins appeared, searchlights blazing. Paramedics poured out with armed federal agents. SSA Morgan Chen approached. "You must be cross. Where's the victim?" Ethan gestured to the cabin. "Inside. GSW, hypothermia. Her K9 partner's also wounded." Paramedics moved fast. They emerged with Sienna on a stretcher, Freya on another, Odin walking beside her. Sienna's eyes found Ethan's as they loaded her. "Thank you," she mouthed. Chen looked at the zip-tied enforcers. "And these? Cleanup crew. They're cooperating." "Good. You're coming with us, Chief Cross. We need your statement." "Not yet," Ethan said. "Ranger District Chief Marcus Holbrook is dirty. He set her up." Chen's eyes narrowed. "Proof?" "The victim's testimony. Plus, these 2 will talk." "Then we move fast," Chen said, "before Holbrook knows we're coming." Ethan looked at Odin, who was still watching the helicopter carrying Freya. "We're going to finish this, boy," he said quietly. "For her." The mission wasn't over. By 0800, the FBI had Marcus Holbrook in custody at his Ocean View house, the kind a district ranger couldn't afford on government salary. 4 agents had him face down on expensive tile before he finished his morning coffee. "Marcus Holbrook, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder of a federal officer, corruption, and racketeering," Chen said flatly. At the FBI field office, Chen dropped a thick file on the table. "Your cleanup crew talked. They gave you up in under an hour. Garrett Kane is in the wind, but we'll find him." She slid photos across, tire tracks, crates, the lighthouse interior. "We found it this morning. 50 crates of stolen military weapons, pharmaceuticals, all moving through your parkland." Holbrook's jaw tightened. "When Vale got too close, you set her up to be killed." "I want my lawyer," Holbrook repeated mechanically. "Here's what happens. You cooperate, give us Crow, maybe avoid Supermax, or stay silent and we bury you forever." For the first time, Holbrook's mask cracked. "Crow isn't just some smuggler. He's connected. Lawyers, judges, people you can't touch." "Try me," Chen said coldly. Behind the mirror, Ethan watched. This was justice, not delivered with a rifle in darkness, but in a courtroom with evidence and law. Justice nonetheless. 2 days later, Ethan walked into Sienna's hospital room. She sat up in bed, shoulder bandaged, IV running, pale and exhausted, but alive. Beside her bed lay Freya on a thick dog bed, flank wrapped in clean bandages, eyes bright. Her tail thumped when she saw Ethan. Odin approached slowly, respectfully, touching his nose to hers. "They told me what you did," Sienna said, voice hoarse. "You saved my life." Ethan shook his head. "Odin found you. I just followed. They were going to let us die. They're going to prison," Ethan said simply. "For a long time." Sienna looked at Freya, resting her head on Odin's paws. She's going to be okay. Another inch and the bullet would have hit her spine. Like her partner, Ethan said. Sienna smiled faintly. Then darkness crossed her face. Holbrook. I trusted him. He's going to prison, and you did your job. Without your reports, we wouldn't have had a case. But I almost died doing it. Yeah, Ethan said. But you didn't. The operation's shut down. The lighthouse is secure. You won. Doesn't feel like winning. Ethan understood. He'd felt that ash-tasting victory too many times. SSA Chen entered with a younger agent carrying a box. Ranger Vale. 17 arrests in 48 hours. The network is dismantled. Holbrook's cooperating. We're closing in on Crow. Sienna's face hardened. The Park Service wants me back. They're calling me a hero. They ignored my reports for months. The system failed. That's why I'm here with an offer, Chen said. FBI Wilderness Crimes Unit. Smuggling, trafficking on federal land. We need people who know terrain. People we can trust. She set a business card on the table. Ethan sat down. What are you going to do? I don't know, Sienna admitted. I loved this job, but now you know the truth, Ethan said. The uniform doesn't make you clean. What makes you those things is what you do when no one's watching. Is that what you tell yourself? Every day. They sat in silence, two people who had walked through darkness and survived. Outside, Oregon rain fell soft and cleansing. For the first time in days, Sienna felt hope. 3 weeks later, Ethan sat in a secure FBI briefing room with Chen, Sienna, now officially a task force consultant, and Senior Special Agent David Corso from Financial Crimes. We have a problem, Corso said, pulling up a presentation. Garrett Kane is still in the wind, but we found something else. A network diagram appeared, dozens of connected nodes. This is Crow's operation, bigger than we thought. The lighthouse was one node, 4 other locations across the Pacific Northwest, each run by a corrupt official. Sienna went pale. How many? At least 12 we've identified. Every official received consulting fees from the same shell corporation, North Point Logistics. Owned by? Ethan asked. Cascade Holdings, a private equity firm in Seattle. He clicked. A photo appeared. A man in his 50s, silver hair, perfect teeth, expensive suit. Douglas Mercer, former defense contractor CEO, current venture capitalist, philanthropist. Donated $2 million to wilderness conservation last year. He's Crow, Chen said flatly. We believe so, but we can't prove it. He's insulated behind shell companies. Holbrook never met him. Kane used encrypted channels. We need something concrete. Ethan leaned forward. Where is he now? His estate. San Juan Island, private compound, security. He knows we're coming. Then we need to move fast, Sienna said. Chen shook her head. Not without evidence. If we raid and come up empty, his lawyers bury us. Ethan looked at Odin at his feet, then Freya beside Sienna. What if we already have it? He said slowly. Everyone turned. Sienna documented everything. We have Holbrook's testimony, financial trail. What we don't have is the link between Mercer and physical evidence. Correct, Corso said. That's the gap. Ethan smiled grimly. Then let's close it. The plan was audacious and dangerous. The FBI couldn't officially sanction it. But after a long silence, Chen said 3 words. I trust you. That was enough. Ethan and Sienna flew to Seattle, then took the ferry to San Juan Island. They rented an unmarked vehicle and drove to where Mercer's estate backed onto dense forest, federal land with public access. They parked and hiked in. Odin and Freya moved ahead, silent scouts. This is insane, Sienna whispered as they crouched in underbrush, watching the compound through binoculars. Yep, Ethan agreed. They watched for 2 hours. Guards followed predictable patterns with a blind spot near the back fence. "There," Ethan said, pointing. "That outbuilding, 20 yards inside the fence, separate from the main house, no windows, heavy lock. That's not a tool shed, that's a vault. How do we get in?" Ethan pulled a K9 camera harness. "We don't, they do." He fitted it on Odin. Scout, quiet. The Belgian Malinois melted into shadows. On the tablet, they watched him slip under a gap in the fence, pad silently across the compound to the outbuilding. The camera showed a heavy steel door, biometric lock, and ventilation grate. "Good boy. Mark and return." Odin scratched the ground 3 times and vanished back. 2 minutes later, he was beside Ethan. "That's our target. That building has something Mercer doesn't want found." "So what now?" "Now we call Chen. Give her the footage. That's enough for a warrant." Ethan called from the ferry terminal. "We found it. Separate structure. High security." "Send me everything," Chen said. "I'll take it to the judge. If this works, we move tomorrow. And if it doesn't, hope you can run fast, Cross." The FBI raid happened at 0600. 4 helicopters, 30 agents, overwhelming force. Ethan and Sienna watched from the tree line, Odin and Freya at their sides. The breach was textbook. Gate rammed. Agents poured in. Mercer's security dropped weapons immediately. Douglas Mercer was found in his study, sipping coffee in a silk robe, utterly unconcerned. "I assume you have a warrant." Chen stepped forward. "Douglas Mercer, you're under arrest for racketeering, conspiracy, smuggling, and attempted murder." Mercer smiled. "My attorneys will be here within the hour. You won't find anything. We'll see." The forensic team cut through the outbuilding's lock. Inside was a treasure trove. File cabinets with shipping manifests, hard drives, burner phones, and most damning, a detailed ledger listing every corrupt official, with dates, amounts, and services. "Cross, Sienna, get in here." They entered. Mercer stood in his opulent living room, hands cuffed, smugness finally cracking. "You," he said, staring at Ethan. "You're the one who found the Ranger." "Yeah. You couldn't just let it go. She was nobody. A Ranger. She didn't matter." Sienna stepped forward. "I mattered to the people I protected, and I mattered to him." Mercer sneered. "I have lawyers, connections. I'll be out in 6 months." Chen smiled coldly. "No, Mr. Mercer, you won't. We have everything. Your files, your ledger, your network, testimony from Holbrook, Kane, who we picked up in Vancouver last night, and a dozen others." Fear flickered in Mercer's eyes. "You're done," Chen said. "You'll spend the rest of your life in federal prison." As agents led Mercer away, Ethan and Sienna stood watching dawn break over the Pacific. Odin and Freya sat side by side, bodies pressed together. 2 warriors, 2 survivors, 2 dogs who had saved more than lives. They had saved hope. 6 months later, the Seattle courtroom was packed. The trial had captivated the Pacific Northwest. The jury deliberated 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Mercer's face went ashen. The judge showed no mercy. "Mr. Mercer, you exploited wealth and position to corrupt officials, endanger lives, and traffic illegal goods. You attempted to have a federal officer murdered. You've shown no remorse. I sentence you to 35 years in federal prison without parole." The gavel fell. In the gallery, Sienna sat beside Ethan. She didn't cheer or cry. She simply closed her eyes and exhaled. "It's over," she whispered. "Yeah," Ethan said. "It is." Outside, reporters swarmed. They slipped out a side entrance, Odin and Freya leading the way. No interest in being heroes. They'd done what needed doing. That was enough. 3 weeks later, Ethan stood on his cabin deck watching the Pacific. Late spring now, warmer air, forest alive with birdsong. Odin lay at his feet, but his gaze kept drifting to the driveway. At 1400 hours, a Park Service truck pulled up. Sienna climbed out, Freya immediately at her side. The German shepherd's limp was barely noticeable. She bounded toward Odin, and the dogs greeted each other with transcendent joy. Sienna walked onto the deck. Hey, I got the job, FBI Wilderness Crimes Unit, full agent status. Training starts next month. That's great. What about you, going back to the teams? Ethan shook his head. No, put in my retirement papers. 20 years was enough. So what now? He smiled faintly. For the first time in my adult life, I don't have orders, don't have a mission. That sounds terrifying. It is, but also freeing. They stood in comfortable silence. Freya barked happily. Odin chased her across the clearing, both dogs running with abandon. They saved us, Sienna said softly. Not the other way around. Yeah, they did. Sienna looked at him. The FBI unit needs consultants, people with tactical experience who understand wilderness. I'm offering you a purpose. No orders, no chain of command, just helping people who fall through the cracks, like I did. Ethan considered. A new mission, different service. Odin and I are in. Sienna smiled, the first genuine, unguarded smile he'd seen from her. Good, because I wasn't taking no for an answer. They shook hands, a partnership forged in darkness, now stepping into light. Because sometimes all it takes is one person refusing to walk away, one dog refusing to stay silent, one choice to stand up instead of stand by. That's not just heroism, that's humanity at its best. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to be reminded that heroes still exist. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and let us know in the comments. What was your favorite moment? Was it the K9's loyalty, the SEAL's protection, or the moment justice was served? We read every comment. God bless, and see you in the next story.